Okay, good evening. So now we'll be dealing with part B of the IR part. So largely this is the Indian foreign policy or the bilateral relations. So first I'll give a brief idea that how do we approach the questions from part B. So as I told, when you choose your questions in that regard in the exam, if you're a person who you feel that you're finding it difficult to address part A questions, because I don't know, part A you have to be good with interlinking. So you have to know which concept to link based on which question. If you feel that way, then you attend more number of questions from part B. Means 3 questions you can attend from part B. Now an overall idea that how to approach part B questions, because this can be bit dynamic. But as we have seen when you have done India's nuclear policy, India's stand on WTO, climate change negotiation, we have also covered part B questions. So you can see it is not so dynamic in that regard. You have to have an overall understanding of the approach. So many times what some students will feel confused is that how many viewpoints we need to add in an answer. Okay. When we say viewpoints of whom, like IR experts, it can be C. Raja Mohan. You have, there's no end to it. You have Bharat Karnad, you have Harshvi Pant, you have Brahma Chelani. Okay. One thing you can think of that you can use them limitedly based on wherever you find the relevance or the need. You cannot just bring viewpoints in your answer. Your answer should focus on the analysis part. And again, what is the analysis part? Go into the demand of the question. Try to understand the demand of the question. And few things you can know here is that you can have pre-prepared introductions. You can have pre-prepared conclusions. 1 or 2 introduction, 1 or 2 conclusions. And you could have also pre-thought about what you can link in your answer. As I told now, for example, India, China, try to link complex interdependence. Right? India, Pakistan, try to link what? Zero sum game. So try to write in a particular page certain keywords and keep going through those keywords. So that will enable you to know that what keyword you can use in which answers. So you have a lot of keywords for IR to analyze. For example, you have strategic convergence and divergence. Right, random keywords, just you have to think on them. Then you have dimensions, defense collaboration. Then you have geo-economics. You have geo-politics. Means when you look at a question, you can think from different directions. Then you can also look from the angle of diaspora. Can be one of the analytical tool, or security. When again you look at the idea of security, think from the lines of traditional security and non-traditional security. Think about the concept balance of power, national interest, the keywords you can bring in your analysis, deterrence. And what else you can use as the keywords? Okay, you can also look at a technological dimensions. Then you can look at diplomacy. So you have track 1, track 2, track 1.5, public diplomacy. Means you can bring in your answers when you think about it. You can think about different aspects of power, hard power, soft power, smart power. You can also think in terms of arms race. You can also think from the angle of gender, and you can also think from the angle of collective security. Now, I'm telling you, for a particular region only, these are the dimensions through which you can look through. You can also look at the angle of the role of non-state actors. You can also look to the concept of hyphenation and dehyphenation. And you can also look at how resources can be used as a strategic asset. Strategic asset. You can also link, you can look through the direction of minilaterals and multilaterals. You can also link from the direction of world order. You can have these keywords all in one page and keep looking at those keywords. You will be able to bring different dimensions in your answer in that regard. And you can also look at the institutions which are involved, the policy making, foreign policies, Prime Minister's office, Ministry of External Affairs, the think tanks in that regard. Think about data. Have some data like trade, how much is that, recent data, try to make a collection of it. Then also look at from the directions of different theoretical perspectives where you can fit in democratic peace theory, or as we told, complex interdependence, or a social constructivist approach, or from the angle of functionalism or neo-functionalism. When you are bringing your analysis here into the paper. So when you have these many dimensions in that regard, then you will be able to also, you can also look at the relation from a historical context. You can also look at the relation from a cultural context. And if you see most of the questions which I have asked in previous year in bilateral relations or multilateral relations, most of them have been related to the current, means recent developments that has happened. And most of them, they are not specific, they are more on a broader framework. And when you articulate, when you have read certain articles on ORF, Diplomat, or even Indian Express. So what is that? Don't fill your answer only with viewpoints. You can use good anecdotes in your answer, but more important is the language what they've used and the different perspectives they brought in their analysis. And you can say many times when they refers India-China relations, you can see they'll write as New Delhi. New Delhi suffers from Panipat syndrome. Okay, these kind of anecdotes can be used. Or when Brahma Chalani, he speaks about the water disputes, etc. He calls China as a hydro hegemon. Okay, so your answer should be with analysis, it should be with different perspectives rather than just looking at from what are the different viewpoints you have added. Viewpoint is just an introduction or a conclusion where you can say. So it's more important to understand the demand of the question, and through this you can write. Or in many times in conclusion you can fit in Palmer and Perkins. Palmer and Perkins, where they say there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent friends or foes. The only permanence is national interest. Okay. Many times you can also bring the angle of a domestic politics. How domestic politics can also impact the bilateral relations. Or you can, in your keywords, you can look from what types of wars: proxy war, guerrilla warfare tactics, or you can say Mearsheimer when you are told the American strategy of bait and bleed. These are all the different keywords. So don't worry about how many scholars you know. It's more about the concepts, you know, or one or two major things. Anyway you can use Hans Morgenthau in many answers, Mearsheimer in many answers. Naturally there you can write about them. So now let's look into some questions basically to understand now how to go about answering these questions. So let us look at some questions from this part B. Okay, we'll take holistically. Largely the important countries are China, Russia, Israel. Okay, these are the important ones, and they can also ask some question on minilaterals. So let us look at some questions in part B, and let us think how do we approach these questions. So let us take random questions in that regard, because now we have sufficient content to write if you know a part A a bit. So here let us think in 2023 question, they have asked one question here. First question is explain the major features of Indian foreign policy. Indian foreign policy in 21st century. Major features of Indian foreign policy in 21st century. So this they have asked for 10 marks, and you have to write for 150 words. The challenge always with an IR paper, especially part B, is that you might have a lot of content to write, but the ability to bring more accuracy and more specificity in your answer always starts with observing. You know, you can have ready-made introductions. You can also have conclusions, but in between you have to fill the thing. So in this question, if you look at the question, what they are asking is that what are the major features of the Indian foreign policy in 21st century. So tell me, how will you start your answer, what your introduction will be, and what is a key aspect in the question. How do you structure your points, what you have here. Question they are asking is explain the major features of Indian foreign policy in 21st century. Basically 21st century means which time period? 20th century means what? 1950. 1900 to 2000. 21st century means what? Post 2000. So they are not asking about traditional Indian foreign policy. They are asking what are the major features. Again, the word major feature, you don't need to write everything. The major thing what you can identify, which direction the Indian foreign policy is oriented. So how will you write the answer here? See, Shivani, multi-alignment is fine, but how do you start your answer? What is the introduction you are going to write? Okay, one point what is saying that you can say in the beginning of 19th century, Indian foreign policy was largely oriented towards idealism. You can say the 21st century, sorry, 20th century Indian foreign policy was largely based on idea, but in 21st century, Indian foreign policy has shifted towards realism, or it has been more pragmatic. That is one introduction you can write. or any other introduction what anybody else feel that they can add here? Online students, Shivani, Satyam, any other good introduction what you can feel to look at the question and what context they're asking. They're asking what are the major features of 21st Indian foreign policy in 21st century. So okay, one we can say a background saying that in 20th century Indian foreign policy largely was ridden by idealism, but you can say towards the end of 20th century Indian foreign policy has shifted to be more pragmatic. Okay, that is one introduction you can write. Any other introduction what anybody else has? Okay, then what will you go on to write? Okay, now what are the important features in 21st century? So one of the major shift in the Indian foreign policy we can also see in the 21st century that there has been a shift towards from non-alignment towards multi-alignment with strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy being the central focus of our foreign policy. Example, you can say India being part of BRICS, Quad, etc. Purva has given a thing called as the foreign policy refers to cultural ethics, civilizational values and national interest of a country. Okay. Shivani, Indian foreign policy has shifted from idealism to progressive realism where national interest counts more than the values. Good. Non-interference, mutual respect, Vanchashil, Jambodipas. See, Purva, you are speaking more about the traditional aspects of Indian foreign policy. They are asking what is the main features. You can bring those points. You can say even in 21st century there are certain civilizational values which India is promoting. But try to start your answer being what do you see the shift? Okay, largely the Indian foreign policy in 20th century was largely driven by idealism. But with the beginning of 21st century, you can see there is a shift of the Indian foreign policy towards realism or what you can say pragmatism. Okay, so one we can say core feature is multi-alignment. Then what is the second core feature of Indian foreign policy in 21st century? So basically you can see the Indian foreign policy today is one of the central feature is defensive offense. In order to protect its national interest. Example, surgical strikes against Pakistan. Third, what is the third important feature of the thing? Third important defining feature. Yes, what Purva said that you can add. The third important feature is that today Indian foreign policy, the centralized feature is not only it is driven by the central government, we also see the emergence of para diplomacy. Where states also are playing a key role with respect to foreign affairs. Then, yeah, we'll come to more focus, but right, what is the core feature of it? What is it? They're asking what are the features of the Indian foreign policy in 21st century. So features means characteristics. Then, what is the other core feature of Indian foreign policy in 21st century? The Indian foreign policy today is not just focusing on geopolitics, it is also given a lot of importance to geoeconomics. So in 21st century, we can say foreign policy is also been a tool to drive India's domestic policies. So for example, Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. Fifth one, What is the fifth important characteristics of the Indian foreign policy? What else you can think of? The core features or central features of the Indian foreign policy in 21st century. The other important feature of Indian foreign policy has been India is projecting itself to be a leading power, and India foreign policy is focusing on taking up initiatives in favor of the global south. So for example, you can say Vaccine Maitri initiative. Then sixth, what is the sixth important feature of Indian foreign policy? Tell me features. What else is in 21st century, what else you find is a core characteristics of Indian foreign policy? Opportunist. Indian foreign policy in 21st century is more action oriented. For example, you can see the shift from look east towards act east. It's become more action oriented, that is look east to act east. That you already done, being pragmatic to be a leading power reflects it. In 21st century, Indian foreign policy is also focusing on democratization of international institutions. For example, India is asking for what? UNSC reforms. India is also aligned with countries like China, Russia as part of BRICS and trying to bring what? New Development Bank or Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So now try to write a conclusion for it, because you cannot go on, choose 5 or 6 major points, what are the core features. Now you have to write a conclusion for this answer. What will you write as the conclusion? What would be an ideal conclusion? So you can say, though we see certain shades of realism in Indian foreign policy in 21st century, but we can say there is a lot of continuity with respect to its values, what it has carried from ages. So even today, Indian foreign policy continues with its philosophical foundations of what? Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that world is one big family, and India's foreign policy is looking to ensure a democratic multipolar world order. Something like that you can write in your answer. So look west centralized. See, Purva's one point is correct. In 21st century, you can see India is focusing on Indo-Pacific. Okay, so that you can say that why it has been focusing on Indo, because the rise of China in that regard. But apart from that, your answer should speak about what? The core essential features of Indian foreign policy in 21st century. The same question can be asked one more way. If you have seen, they've asked previous year also. They've asked questions such as, comment on the shift in Indian foreign policy, over the last decade. decade. So the question can come this way also. Comment on the shift in Indian foreign policy or last decade. So you can know for this question, last decade means from 2014 to 24, what is the shift in the Indian foreign policy? So how will you start your answer here? How will you will start your introduction here? What is an ideal introduction here? Yes, online students, what will be the ideal introduction that you can write here? You can write Harsh V. Pant. Harsh V. Pant says that with rise of PM Modi in Indian politics has brought considerable shift in the evolution of Indian foreign policy. Because last decade means 2014. So in 2014, obviously, what was a major shift happened? The rise of PM Modi in Indian politics, that did have some changes with respect to the foreign policy. One disadvantage with this introduction is that you are narrowing down everything to one person, and you can say because of one person foreign policy is changing. Okay, that will be one of the disadvantage of this introduction. Or you can say since 2014, or a simple introduction, the Indian foreign policy has seen considerable changes from the past. Okay. Now they are asking you to discuss what are the shifts that has happened. So one shift, what you can happen, there has been shift from idealism towards more pragmatism. Second, there can be also shift from the strategies from a defensive foreign policy to more of an offensive defense. Again, you can give the example of surgical strikes against Pakistan. Then you can say there has been a shift from non-alignment towards multi-alignment. You can give the examples. Fourth, you can also say there is a shift with respect to what the intensity. For example, from look east to act east. And we can also say that there has been greater engagement with diaspora. So you can say with it a limited engagement with diaspora. Today diaspora has become the central focus of India's soft power in that regard. Then the other shift that has happened over last decade is that India's shift in position with respect to relations with Israel. India has brought dehyphenation with the relations with Israel. And what is the other shift do you see in the last decade? But how will you articulate that point? With complex intertime cobweb model, new world order, India shown as evolution. Okay. Active engagement with the Arab world. Yeah, you can say one more greater shift with Indian foreign policy. What Harsh V. Pant also says that India today is projecting itself to be a leading power. And today you can say India is also focusing on acquiring more naval ports, etc. Sabang, Dukum with Oman, Changi, it's Singapore in that regard. Chabahar with Iran. Okay. Then you can also say the other shift in the foreign policy is also what? The change with relations with China. So you can say the modus vivendi, modus vivendi has ended with China, and today India is trying to balance China. So can you give example of formation of Quad? Hmm? And you can say the greater tourist shift has been also on Indo-Pacific region. But at the same time, you can say the Indian foreign policy has also continued with, because foreign policy cannot change drastically over period, it has also continued with certain essential elements such as our civilizational values, projection of its soft power, and continued engagement with the global south. But it has increased the engagement. So you can say in last decade or so, you can say India is now trying to what you can say project itself as a responsible leading power, and India is asking for its rightful place in the evolving world order. Something like that you can write as an answer. So these kind of questions you cannot prepare content extensively. You'll have to analyze and write the answer based on what is the demand of the question that has been asked. So similarly, let us think there are questions which are also asked on South Asia. This is a common question they have asked on South Asia. Every year there is one question they have asked on South Asia, and it same revolve around why South Asia has been not included. So let us take in last year what they have asked. What are the reasons? 1B. What are the reasons? The reasons for lack of regionness, in South Asia. What are the reasons for lack of regionness in South Asia? So this they have asked for 10 marks, 150 words. As I told, what you can do is that you can beforehand only prepare some good introductions for this South Asia, because these are all repeated theme, na? Look East policy, Act East policy, Japan, America. Okay, what will you write here is your introduction. What are the reasons for lack of regionness? So what do you mean by regionness? What is the meaning of regionness? What is the meaning of regionness? Means there is no feeling we belong to one particular region. Okay, they don't say regional solidarity. They're asking what are the reasons for lack of regionness. So what will be your introduction? What you can write as your introduction? Anybody with a good introduction for South Asia? Online students. What you can think of when you look at this question? You guys have no introduction. Think about the question, think about the context. They're asking what are the reasons for lack of regionness in South Asia. So what will be an apt introduction for this particular question? So Purva, who says that South Asia nations undermined interdependence, collaboration, and a shared history they have. South Asian nations undermined interdependence, collaboration, and shared history they have. Okay, that's a good introduction. So according to Shyam Saran, South Asia has undermined the interdependence and collaboration and shared history they have. Interdependence, collaboration and shared history they have. Good, this can be a good introduction. Now once your introduction is done, now you have to come to the demand of the question. So they are asking lack of regionness. So obviously the answer will be that what you are going to write as many dimensions as possible why regionness, and one last paragraph you are going to write what can be done in this regard. So what are the reasons for the lack of regionness? What are the different dimensions you can bring here? What is the geographical factor? See, first and foremost, right, one of the biggest lack of reason is the British legacy. British legacy of unresolved border disputes. So give one or two examples here. Second, what is the second reason? What Ricks says that these are all prismatic societies. Since these are prismatic societies, what is the problem here? Nationalism has been a hindrance to integration. Example, you can give India and Pakistan. Third problem is what? Not free, we already told unresolved border disputes. Third problem is with us lack of connectivity. Lack of connectivity. Why? Because the region is focusing more on high politics and they are giving less focus on low politics. Fourth, but how that is a lack of regionness? Same climate. See, that is economic reason, that is different. Give more concrete point. Why South Asia has been not able to lack that regionness? The reason is that I think somebody has already written the problem of big brother perception about India. Fifth, there is insecurity dilemma. Sixth, China factor. So many countries are using China as a balancing card against India, and you can say, as they say, today the universe of South Asia has a second sun. Seventh, SARC, according to C. Rajamohan, is a jammed vehicle, and he calls Pakistan as the camel which has slowed down the caravan of SARC, because SARC works on consensus, and Pakistan has objected to many Indian proposals such as the SARC satellite, etc. And you can also say, yeah, what Purva's point is that, yeah, imagined communities, these are okay. Then any other point, what you can add? Lack of regionness within SARC. Very good. The role of non-state actors such as terror groups. For example, you can say It's been a problem between India, Pakistan's bilateral relations. And you can also, the region is also politically unstable. For example, collapse of democracy in Afghanistan, now recently, very recently, yesterday, just half an hour back, in Bangladesh. So all these factors has led to what? South Asia being less integrated. But however, you can say in conclusion, has Suhasini Haidar says, if SARC is restructured and reinvented, South Asia provides opportunity for countries to integrate, trade, as well as emerge as what? What? Emerge as what? Emerge as a South Asian community. So something like that you can write in your conclusion. So these kind of questions are all straightforward questions that has been asked in the exam. So here again the challenge will be always is that you can write so many points, but try to write within 150 words and try to bring more dimensions in your answer. And here you don't worry about how many scholars you are bringing. Okay, keywords like security dilemma, balance of power, China card, the role of external actors, role of non-state actors, lack of connectivity, political instability, prismatic societies. These kind of concepts you can link in your answer, and always your conclusion should be prescriptive. Prescriptive means what you suggest, that how this region can move towards. Don't try to be very negative. Introduction you told, na? South Asia, despite its cultural heritage, history, etc., it has been one of the least integrated region. So I can say 5% is the inter-regional trade. Introduction, you address the problem that, what is South Asia, why South Asia, or what is the problem in South Asia. What do you mean by still potential most diverse? Hmm. Hmm. What is the meaning of diverse? You can say, in spite of its potential, it has been one of the less integrated region in the world. So here, as I told, mainly it is the keywords and examples. Try to give as many examples in your answer. And Purva, don't go for too much theory inclusion, like golden arches theory, the state go for less conflict. So try to limit your theory, whatever you can say. Okay, because what will happen is that when you have too many points, you will get confused what to write. Have a clarity, introduction, conclusion. I am going to write historical reasons, political reasons, social reasons, technological reasons, connectivity, etc., security angle. So that should be what you have to written in your answer. Now let us take again with one more question on South Asia, because last time they asked 2 questions on South Asia. Okay, so one more question they have asked. Why do ethnic conflicts and insurgencies continue to remain a major impediment to regional cooperation, in South Asia. Regional cooperation in South Asia. This is one of the questions asked in 2023. 10 marks. I have to write for 150 words. So here it's very important to understand the demand of the question, then you have to be able to link what are the points you can bring. So here they are asking what? They are asking why do, what is the keyword? Ethnic conflicts and insurgencies continue to remain a major impediments in the regional cooperation in South Asia. That is the demand of the question what they asked. Why it reverses an impediment. So here, how will you address the demand of the question and what will be your approach? Yeah, what concepts you will be able to link here? What will be an ideal introduction? To this particular question. So here it's more about you understanding what exactly they are asking, that you will have to write. So if you look at into what content you can have to write the answer, here you can know first of all what are the ethnic conflicts in the region. Simple, you want to generate certain, for example, you can have the conflicts between the Tamilian issue and Sinhalese, or if you take the conflict in Baloch region in Pakistan, it's an ethnic conflict, they are demanding for a separate, or the Khalistan movement which is there in India. Okay, you can say in Bangladesh also the attack on Hindus, etc. Okay, the Rohingya, yeah, it is more not South Asia, but yeah, you can still bring Rohingyas because it has problem with Bangladesh and India also. And they are telling insurgency. Insurgency means what? Obviously, insurgent groups, the Naga Kaflang group, right? Insurgent means they are waging war against state. So they are telling why ethnic conflicts and insurgency, they continue to remain a major impediment to regional cooperation in South Asia. So basically, you, in your answer, you have to explain first of all what are the ethnic conflicts and insurgencies in the region. Then you need to explain why do they create problems for what you can say, regional integration. So here Purva says that clash of civilization can be introduced. Okay, Purva, explain how do you use clash of civilization? Okay, what will be your exact introduction? Okay, Shivani, what's one point? Yeah, that's a valid point. Artificial borders, so ethnicity cannot be bounded in borders. Okay, that is correct. So you can say these are all imagined societies. Hmm. No, example, one of the reason is that why ethnic conflicts are, because these borders are all not natural, these are artificial borders. So you have minorities on the either side. So any kind of impact here will have effect. But what is the introduction you will start with? What is the exact introduction you can start with for this question? Why you will start with minority Pakistan? You speak as a region as a whole. Because they are asking ethnic conflicts and insurgency will continue. So you can say South Asia continues to remain one of the most ethnic conflict and insurgent prone regions in the world. And it has been a flashpoint for various conflicts. So then you go on to say that what are these ethnic conflicts you can see in different pathways. So if you want, you can draw a map here and draw a map and show where you can say ethnic conflicts are there. If you want to be creative, draw a map and show the ethnic conflicts in Sri Lanka, in northwest part of India, northeast part of India, in Myanmar. So here you can say because of porous borders, artificial boundaries, you can say any kind of ethnic conflicts or this insurgency will have a spillover effect. And second one, you can say Most of these countries are prismatic societies. So obviously here we can say that still nationalism is based on ethnic nationalism. Hence in that regard, any kind of ethnic conflicts here will have ripple effect on the either side of the border. For example, the attack on Hindus in Bangladesh has impact on Muslims in India. So it's a paired minority conflict. And second one, you can say many countries here like Pakistan use ethnic conflicts or use insurgency to their advantage. For example, Pakistan using the strategy of what? Terrorism and proxy war against the Indian state. This will create what? A situation of insecurity dilemma. And what is the third important point, that why this ethnic conflict and insurgency will create a problem? So I can give, for example, the Rohingya issue which is there in Myanmar has impacted both India and Bangladesh relation, because now these countries will have to face the problem of what? The migration, what happens. So I can take for the example of the Rohingya problem which has been created between India, Myanmar and Bangladesh. And fourth one, domestically the parties in power in that regard, they are dependent upon support of these ethnic communities or what we call as para communities. So many times you can say the relationship has been strained because of these ethnic conflicts. For example, Nepal feels India is interfering in its internal affairs because of its tactic support of Janjatis and Madhesis. So in a way, the region has not been able to evolve out of this ethnic intricacies what are there and insurgency what is there, and that is why the countries are always focusing on high politics rather than focusing on lower politics where there are possible areas they can merge. So this is one of the reason that why this region remains an less integrated region. In spite of its despite scope, the inter-regional trade is just 5%. So that is what you need to bring in your answer. So sometimes what will happen, the question might look easy, but still you will have to require to narrate your points meeting is a demand. So it is a major impediment. You have to explain in your answer how it is an impediment, why it is an impediment, and you have to give examples. So this is one of the way you can address the answer. So if you look at the paper, directly they are asking ethnicity, water crisis they can also give, how water crisis can also be an, again you can write Kala Pani issue, Tista issue, Indus water treaty issue, and you can bring here Brahma Chelani, who's written his book, The Asia, the New Battleground for Water. And you can say Brahma Chelani predicts that South Asia is going to be one of the epicenter for battles of water crisis, because this region is largely an agrarian region. People are dependent on water. So as climate change happens, there is going to be resource crunch, and this will lead to countries going to conflict. And he has also warned about the role of China emerging as what? Hydro hegemon. Similarly, you have to connect and you have to tell what is the complexity in resolving these disputes, because here you can say water issues only the central government cannot decide, they'll have to also take the support of the state governments. Example, the Bengal government has been one of the what you can say issue with India signing the Tista agreement. So questions can come. You can speak about Tibetan ethnic communities in Dharmasala, but yeah, mainly we are speaking about Purva here, South Asia. China cannot be included as part of South Asia. So largely speak about South Asia only, why it has been a problem. South Asia's integration, they are not only telling India, na? You can also say the problem of Pakistan and Afghanistan. There is ethnic problem also along the western border, Durand line. Yeah. So again in mind, so here that's what I told, when they ask about South Asia, they can ask about ethnic issues, they can ask about water sharing issues, they can ask about border issues, they can ask about trade related issues. You have to be able to build your answer accordingly, or some questions will be too negative In that sense, they'll tell South Asia has no future, comment. So obviously, first part of the answer you have to tell why there is a view that South Asia has no future. Usually you have people like C. Rajamohan are very pessimistic about future of SAARC. Then you have to bring arguments that how you can say still there is scope for improvement of relation, what can be done. You have to speak of the positive aspect. So again it depends upon what is the question they have asked in the exam. Now one more question they have very frequently asked is that India now is taking a lot of initiative with Global South. So one question last time they were asked, what are the diplomatic steps? What are the diplomatic steps has India taken to articulate the interests of the global south, in international politics. What are the diplomatic steps that India has taken to articulate the interest of the global south? So Purva, I'll share some documents. I'll share it within 5 to 6 days, some documents on these issues. What are the diplomatic steps that has been taken by the Indian to articulate the interest of global south in international politics? So what will you write here? Or what you can start as your introduction of your answer. This is again 10 marks, 150 words. So what you can write as your introduction. Yes, anybody with a good introduction here. So you can write something like, since independence, the global south has been very close to India's heart as its foreign policy has evolved. Or you can say, since India gained independence, the core aspect of Indian foreign policy has been always to protect the interest of global south. Then what will you write? So they are asking now a more of a faction. What steps India have taken to promote the interest of global south? What are the diplomatic steps that has been taken? So that is the keyword. What is the diplomatic steps? And where? To articulate. Articulate means to express the interest of global south in international politics. So obviously one you can say recently in G20, India was one of the ardent supporter to make Africa one of the member of G20. No, that you come later. They are telling like how they are articulated. So you have to tell articulated in international politics, not India is doing bilaterally. So you have to tell what India is at a global level. So G20 summit, under India's leadership, Africa became, or India supported the Africa's entry into G20. Second, along with the South Africa, India petitioned for the waiver of the vaccine, the patents of vaccine at TRIPS or WTO. And third, so India has demanded for democratization of UN Security Council to give more weightage to developing countries. Fourth, India has aligned with like-minded countries in global climate change negotiations. You have now they formed a group called as like-minded developing countries. India is also leader of G77, where India is articulated for what? Common but differentiated responsibilities. And India is also articulating for climate justice. Fifth, that's what India has done specifically. Yes, for example, along with Japan, India is investing in Africa, that is the Afro-Asia Growth Economic Corridor. Growth Economic Corridor. Sixth, but what is the diplomatic steps they have taken? You have to specifically tell what exactly they have done. That's what agreement. So you can say when India hosted G20 summit, they are also hosting something called as the Voice of the Global South, where they have taken up initiatives for joint development on what? Common issues such as diversification of the global supply chain. Seventh, you can say India has ITEC and Indian Council of Cultural Relations, which is especially working in the developing countries such as Africa, etc., where India is offering what? Tele-education, telemedicine, okay, Pan-African e-network. And you can say they also, India is acting as a bridge between the global north and the global south. For example, formation of International Solar Alliance along with France and the Green Grid Initiative. Green Grid Initiative. For what? Ensuring that the renewable source of energy is more accessible to developing countries at large. And India is also now mooting itself as a net security provider, where India is also saying that it is going to offer security to what? Developing societies or developing countries. For example, Sagar initiative and development of a blue water economy. Okay, that is included in that Pan-African. That one more word. India means here only you can say humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, HADR. So you can include, means you can group that these are the diplomatic initiatives that has been India taken. So in conclusion, what you can say, today India has emerged as what? A leader of the global south countries. Today India is trying to act as a bridge between the global north and global south, and India's vision is that the developing countries should have a greater say in the new emerging world order, and India will be the voice of it. Something like that you can write. So here see, there is no limit on what you have to write, because here points are plenty, but it's more about how do you organize. So think about different dimensions. Okay, from energy point of view what they have done, from WTO point of what they have done, from climate change of point of view what they have done, or with respect to medicine or pharmaceuticals, COVID-19 was there, what India has done in that regard. So patent waiver they have taken, and at democratizing the international institution, bringing African Union into G20. So you can say today India has been trying to project itself as a leader of global South countries. Or you can say India wants to be the voice of the global South. So these are the steps, the diplomatic steps that have been taken by the Indian government to think. So if you see, most of the questions they ask here are pretty easy questions only. But all you need to do is that you have to think calmly. That's what I told. Solve a lot of previous year questions. For here, don't go into so much content addition. Just have 3 years paper, look into it, and have 1 or 2 major content. Means you can easily predict what question they might ask in the exam. So this year, if you take, they might ask questions on SEO, or they might ask question on the BRICS expansion. These are all predictable areas where you can expect the question can come. Or you can look at like one more question, like if you take now countries which are there, you have Russia, you have America, Israel, Japan. These are the major countries they've asked in the exam. Or many times they've asked Africa. Africa is one constantly that has featured in the exam. So let us think they ask here, this question on Africa they've asked. Because Africa can also come under global South, or they can ask specific question on Africa only. So they can ask, discuss the major drivers of India's interests in Africa. Discuss the major drivers of India's interest in Africa. So, yeah, what can you say? What is the major drivers in India's interest? How do you answer this question? How will you write an answer? Because see, these and all, the problem here is that you can have lot of points, but more important is that how do we structure the points, or how do we approach the question? So what will be the introduction? I don't know, always have pre-prepared introduction or conclusion, something that. So you can say, S. Jaishankar, in his book India Way, says that India and Africa historically have a shared bonding, of fight against colonialism. So this can be one of the introduction, what you can write. Now what is the key demand of the question? So this is for 15 marks. So they are asking, discuss the major drivers. Drivers means what? What is pushing the India and Africa relationship? So you can say initially the major Indo-African relationship was largely based on their global stand on neo-colonialism, decolonization, and common opposition to the Western-led economic order. But in recent times, you can say over the last decade, Indo-Africa relationship has deepened, and India's interest in Africa has grown or diversified on various accounts. So now you tell what are the major drivers. Come to China later, but think from different points of view. So they are asking what is the drivers of India's interest in Africa, right? That is the question, right? Yeah, India's interest in Africa. So question's demand is that why is India becoming keenly interested in Africa? So bring different dimensions here. What are the different dimensions? So basically main is the resource. So Africa is largely called as the dark continent, and you can say it has 60% of the world's arable land. And hence India is looking at what the African lands to be the surrogate for India's food production can be surrogate for the India's food production. Then what else is the other thing? Energy security. Africa is rich in what? Oil as well as natural gas in that regard, and India is looking to engage much deeper in Africa for the oil resources, for example Sudan, which is there. Then for example, you can also say India's nuclear project, like countries like Rwanda, etc. They have uranium, and you have critical, what is it, minerals in that regard. Fourth, the economic opportunities. So it can be a market for Indian products. For example, you can say Mahindra, the automobile sector, the pharmaceutical sectors, they find Africa is a huge market for investments. Fifth, correct. So India's idea of Indo-Pacific, it stretches from the coast of Somalia to all the way up to American coast. So India is deeply interested in developing maritime partnership with the African countries, because geopolitically also Africa is very important for India's trade routes in that regard. So you can say example IOR, ARC or the Sagar initiative. Sixth, the growing threats of climate change. And what you can say, democratization requires what? Greater engagement with the African countries in that regard. Then colonialism is done. Come to the present. Why there is a drivers? What currently is growing India's interest in Africa? Seventh one is the geopolitical competition. Because Chinese footprint has expanded in Africa and India is trying to counter it by greater engagement with Japan in its Afro-Asia growth economic corridor. Eighth is the Indian diaspora, the safety and security of Indian diaspora, because there is a large Indian diaspora in Africa, and you can say that what has happened, the recent situations in the coup or what you can say, the rising situation of terrorism has created problems for the Indian thing. And then you can say India is also made almost 11 billion investments in Africa, because India has no opportunity to exercise its soft power through projects such as what? ITEC, the Pan-African E-Network. And India to be also the leader of global south needs support of the African countries. So this has enabled India to engage. So this is one part of the answer, what are drivers. But the question is not what are the drivers, discuss. So obviously you have to also speak about the challenges which are there in India's interest in Africa. So what are the challenges of India's interest in Africa? So here you can write Philip Geek in his book India's Africa Policy Challenges, India-Africa Policy Challenges of millennium-old relation. So Philip Geig in his book India's Africa Policy Challenges, the millennium-old relations, says that India's FDI flow in Africa is mainly concentrated in service sector. India's FDI flow in Africa is mainly concentrated in FDI sector. So India needs to diversify to what? Manufacturing sector also. And the other problem he has highlighted also is that there is no synchronization. There is no synchronization between different developmental instruments. There is no synchronization between different developmental instruments. And you have Rajeshwari Rajgopalan. Rajeshwari Rajgopalan says that India's interest is not backed by its economic heft, where China has greater economic heft. For example, China-Africa's bilateral relation. China-Africa bilateral relation is around $220 billion, whereas India-Africa bilateral relation is just around $52 billion. So India's interest is not backed by its economic heft. The other important problem what Rajeshwari Rajgopalan also says that India has very poor knowledge about the African diversity. Poor knowledge about the African diversity. India largely views Africa through its lens of colonial stories. And has a distorted image of Africa. And then you can say the recent military coups and political instability, rising extremism has threatened India's investments. And it has dented the confidence of the private investors. Recent military groups and rising extremism has threatened India's investments and has dented India's the confidence of the private investors. So these are certain challenges, but in conclusion, again you can say that India should bring more mutually beneficial partnership, and India's approach in Africa should not be like how China's approach is there through debt traps, etc. So India should go, or you can use Prime Minister Modi's statement in your conclusion. You can say PM Modi had said that Africa will be at the top of India's priorities. PM Modi said Africa will be at the top of India's priorities. And India's relation with Africa will be based on the African demands, rather than a unilateral approach. Will be based on African demands rather than a unilateral approach. Or another fact that you can use in your answer to indicate that India is giving lot of importance to Africa, a factual thing is that since 2014, these are all unstructured, you have to use them accordingly based on what is given. Since 2014, there has been 34 outgoing visits. By Indian President, Vice President and PM to Africa. There has been 34 outgoing visits by Indian President, vice president and PM to Africa. If you want to know some projects what has India has launched in Africa, the Pan African Network, the Pan African Network, e-network, Pan African e-network, e-Vidya Bharati, e-Vidya Bharati, e-Vidya Bharati, e-Arogya Bharati, e-Vidya Bharati, e-Arogya Bharati. And you can also note India is Africa's fourth largest trade partner. India is Africa's fourth largest trade partner, fifth largest investor. India is Africa's fourth largest trade partner, fifth largest investor. And you can also say India is involved in what? Peacekeeping operations in Africa. India is also involved in the peacekeeping operations in Africa. And you take down one more thing. AF index is Africa India field training exercise. AF index. AF index is India Africa field training exercise. Then you have Amrut. And you have Amrut. Africa India militaries for regional unity. Africa India militaries for regional unity. Africa India militaries for regional unities. And this thing you know, Sagar, security and growth for all. So your understanding here, the point is that you cannot have a structured notes in these kind of content. You will have to make some small content what you feel that you're effectively, because you have too much content also you won't be able to use it in the answer. So you have to have very limited content which you feel you're going to use it in the answer, and you will be able to, what you can say, organize your analysis based on what is the demand. So here you cannot guess what is the question they'll ask on Africa, but largely any question on Africa will be India's interest in Africa, or growing strategic coherence between India and Africa, or how India and Africa can work together to build a global south. So these kind of questions are going to come in the exam. Okay, so they're not going to ask any individual India and Africa relations. They're not going to ask India, Egypt or something like that. So it will be more based on the region specific in that regard. If you are able to just know a broad, a good introduction, a good conclusion, here and there good viewpoints in that regard, and certain specificity in your answer, that will make a good IR answer. So don't try to blindly always try to say functionalist approach will work, democratic peace theory will work. Look at the question, then you decide what you are going to write. So for the online students, you have any doubt? Shivani, Purva. Okay. Now let us look into one more important country of relations where we can say. So let us look into India, Russia relations. So let us look what are the questions they've asked on India and Russia. Let us take one or two questions what they've asked. Okay. So first let's broadly look into India-Russia dynamics, then we'll go into looking into the question what we can answer. So when we take India-Russia, broadly we can divide the relation in during Cold War, and you can say post-Cold War. So just try to remember whatever you can recall regarding India-Russia. 1971 war with Pakistan, the USSR help. Space collaboration, for example, you can say India's first satellite Aryabhata was launched by Russian vehicle Soyuz. Socialism, the common factor between India and Russia. Or you can say currently even now you have Gaganyaan mission where Indian astronauts are trained in Russian space center. Defense is, you can say, one of the pillar of India-Russia relations. Diamonds is one more pillar. Oil and natural gas, arms import, etc. Again here, for defense you have to know points. For example, BrahMos, okay, or the S-400. And you can also look into the Russia-Ukraine issue here. You can also look at diaspora angle in India-Russia relations. The growing bonhomie between Russo-Sino or Russo-Chino ties. Now in recent times you can say Russia's shift in its foreign policy towards Pakistan. Okay, for example here one of the keyword, Druzhba is the joint military exercise done between Russia and Pakistan. You also have to think about Indo-US relations and how it is impacting, or you have to say how India is trying to balance its relation with Russia. RELOS is one of the things you have to know. What is RELOS? Reciprocal Logistic Exchange Agreement. G2+2, Vladivostok, or India's investment in Vladivostok, the Vladivostok Chennai maritime corridor. And you can say the bilateral trade between India and Russia is wavering just around $25 billion, in spite being a very close friend. Or you can remember PM's Modi's statement where he said, every child in India, knows about that Russia is India's closest ally or friend. And you can also say PM Modi also said, any day an old friend is better than two new friends. Then you can also, what else you can focus on India-Russia dynamics. Both India and Russia are also part of multilateral thing like BRICS, SCO, RIC. You can also see the recent rupee-ruble exchange. International North-South Transport Corridor. You can also see Quad is also part because Russian External Affairs Minister Mr. Sergey Lavrov, he referred Quad as Asian, NATO. And you can also see the number of times PM's visit to Russia. signifies the balancing act which India is trying to do with Russia. Katsa is one more thing in India-Russia's relationship. Katsa brought by US. And you can say India and Russia have diverging views with respect to the geopolitics. For example, India's more focus is now on Indo-Pacific. And you can say with West Asia, India is trying to do the balancing act. Whereas Russia has a common geopolitical vision along with China. With respect to, you can say Russia is backing Syria, Iran, and you can also speak about the Wagner group, the private paramilitary force which is there. Vostrotov. Okay, nuclear sector is one more important between India and Russia relationship. The Kudankulam project. Cultural linkages you can also speak. Many Russian universities offer Hindi, Pali, Sanskrit, Tamil, these kind of interest. And classical dance is also famous in Russia. And you can also say one of the reasons for lack of connectivity in India and Russia is, we say, India-Russia relations suffers from the accident of geography. India-Russia relations suffer from the accident of geography. Bear in mind, these are all, just collect all the content what you know or different aspects of the bilateral relations. So that will help you to write a very good answer based on what is the question they've asked in the exam. So let us take some 2 questions which have come in recent years in that regard. So let us take last year's question, that is 2023. They've asked a question on India-Russia relations. So let us see what is the question and then we'll see how to approach this particular question. So you look at the question here. They've told armed state, economic ties, and congruent geopolitical interest. Geopolitical interest are no longer the 3 pillars, or no longer the 3 pillars of India-Russia's relationship in the emerging strategic context. Comment. To ask for 20 marks. So here forget about how many scholars you know, etc. Here you need to understand the question and try to bring the analysis here on the paper. So first you need to understand what the question, which framework. So they are telling arms trade, economic ties and congruent geopolitical. What do you mean by congruent? Means converging geopolitical interests is no longer the 3 pillars of Indo-Russia relationship in the emerging strategic context. So how do you interpret the question and how will you write your answer? Okay, let us see, you write, S. Jaishankar says that Russia is a time-tested friend of India. But what is the question asking and how will you bring? Hmm. Okay, so one part of your answer, you have to say traditionally what India's relationship with Russia was seen through which lens. So you have to write some part explaining what was the arms trade which was there, what was the economic ties, and converging geopolitical interest. So what was the converging geopolitical interest? What was the converging geopolitical interest? Yes, online students, that how will you approach this question? They're asked, the question is saying that arms trade, economic ties, and convergent, congruent geopolitical interests are no longer the three pillars of Indo-Russia relationship in the emerging strategic context. So obviously the keyword is that first you have to know what is the emerging strategic context. So what is the new strategic aspects that have emerged? Hmm. Okay, India's engagement with more focus on Indo-Pacific. Okay, but that is what it has got to do with Russia. No, they are telling arms trade, economic ties, and congruent geopolitics are no longer the three pillars of India-Russia relationship. So why this is no longer the pillar? Why arms trade is no longer the pillar? Correct. One, India today is trying to diversify it because the changing geopolitical context, China has emerged as a bigger challenge to India, and India feels to tackle the Chinese challenge, we need to diversify our arms trade. So today we have Israel, we have the increasing closeness of Indo-American defense relationship, such as ISET. Okay. Then with economic ties, why that is also one of the no longer the central pillar of Indo-Russian ties. Because you can say India is today looking to diversify its economic interests based on its, okay, what I have shown you. Russia is weakened due to Ukraine war and geopolitical interests are not. Yeah, you can say one, today India is diversifying its economic ties. So today you can see India's bilateral relations with US, it's more than 100 billion. India's bilateral relation with China, which is based on complex interdependence. So India's economic structure also has changed. Today India is looking for private investments. So that is also one of the reasons that why we can say that India's economic diversification is no longer dependent on Russia. And third one, the congruent means converging geopolitical interest means there are certain divergence in the geopolitical interest. What are the divergence? So for Russia, the more interest here is in Eurasia. For India's geopolitical interest is in Indo-Pacific. At the same time, you can say the India's interest in West Asia is different because India wants the balancing act, means a better balancing between Israel, Iran, and the Gulf country, whereas Russia is backing Iran's and Syria. And you can also say that geopolitical compulsion has pushed India closer to America because today India feels the bigger threat comes from China. And that is why you can say India has become more part of Quad, and you can say the India Middle East economic corridor to balance China's BRI project in that regard, whereas Russia has termed the Quad as what? Asian NATO. So these, and at the same time you can say there is growing Russia's convergence with Pakistan in that regard. Why? Because they are also trying to now look to expand east in that regard. But nevertheless, you have to say, nevertheless, these continues to remain important. Why? Even today, if you look at India's dependence on Russia is 60% with respect to its arms trade. Though the economic ties have dwindled, but there is scope of improving the economic ties. India's recent investment in Vladivostok, $2 billion in that regard. And obviously, India is also now trying to export pharmaceutical base in Russia. And third one, you can say that there is certain converging geopolitical interest. The Taliban issue in Russia, it impacts both India and Russia. Rise of China, it's not only creates problem for India, it also creates problem for Russia because Russia is not happy with expanding Chinese expansion within its own neighborhood. Hence, you can say India and Russia can also collaborate with together to work on what? Stability of Central Asia. And you can say the Vladivostok Chennai maritime corridor, which passes through the contestation in South China Sea. But however, as Srinath Raghavan argues that both India and Russia should understand the recent shifts have been driven by their geopolitical necessities, and they should be mature enough to understand this relation has stood the test of time, and it has to ensure that each others are sensitive to each other geopolitical interests. So here it is not important how many scholars you write, it is more important to exactly understand what is the demand of the question. Yes, Arctic is also one more angle what you can bring. You can write all that, but largely seen you bring the arguments and counter arguments. First argument, why this no longer? Because there are shifting interests. Second, you can say still there is scope where you can say they can still work on these sectors or even diversify into other areas. Emerging technologies, space, education, health, global supply chains. These can be the new areas also where India and Russia can diversify the relation. So this is how, that's why I told, reading the question correctly, understanding the question correctly, because in IR you will have content to write. That won't be a problem. But again, the keywords what you use, how do you analyze, that will be very important. So let's look into one more question which they have asked on India and Russia. This question has been asked in I think 2017 in that regard. The recent differences between India and Russia are a result of misconceptions than facts. Elucidate. So this was asked for 15 marks in 2017. So in all the IR question, the most important thing is to exactly understand what is the demand of the question. If you are able to understand the demand of the question, dimensions you will know to write. So if you read the question again, they are asking the keyword, the recent differences. So basically in your answer you have to write about what are the recent differences that has emerged, and they are telling it is a result of misconception. Misconception means what? There is a misunderstanding between the two, and then they are telling rather than facts, they are telling explain. So how will you structure your answer? Because in these kind of questions, structuring is very, very important rather than what points you are going to write. So if you understood the question correctly, then you will know how to analyze and write. So here you can write introduction, what you can say as S. Jai Shankar is India-Russia relations have stood the test of time, but however in recent times it has been testing conditions for India and Russia. Introduction is done. Then you have to bring in your answer, what are the recent differences that has developed between India and Russia. So one you can write, Moscow feels that today New Delhi is becoming more of an American camp follower. Why? Because increased Indo-America defense ties, Lemova, Comcasa, DTTI, ISET, and India is also joining Quad, which Russians have called it as Asian NATO in that regard. Or second one, India also in the other end, New Delhi has also felt that Moscow has become insensitive to India's concerns. Why? The growing Russian ties with China, and you can say Russia's also reach out to Pakistan, and for example you can say bilateral military exercise that has been Druzhba, which has been conducted between Russia and Pakistan, and for the first time Russians have also offered to sell Mi-35 attack helicopters to Pakistan. So this has created what? The recent divergence in the relationship. But however, you can say, according to Srinath Raghavan, these divergences are mainly based on misconceptions which the strategic experts or the people in power have both on the, as I said, the facts are different. Why the facts are different? One, even now, if you see factually, means result of means what? Even though India has given defense deals to US, but India went and signed the S-400, a 5 billion deal with Russia in spite of the American sanctions. Or second one, you can tell, even today India's defense market is largely dependent on Russia because 60% of India's defense equipments are Russian made, and even today MRO, maintenance repair operation, is given to Russia. Though India-US defense relationship is based on buyer and seller, our relationship with Russia is special. It is joint production. And fourth one, you can also say that India's nuclear market, what is there? Pakistan cannot be an alternative. India's nuclear market is much bigger than what Pakistan can offer as a market to Russia. And third one, you can say the growing Russia Sino ties. It is not because of Russia being insensitive to India's concern at that, right? Because that is the changing geopolitical realities. That Russia's increasing tiff with the Western countries have pushed Russia more towards China because of the sanctions that has been imposed. But however, any kind of misconception can also be the foundation of spoiling of the relationship between two sides, if you look from a social constructivist point of view. Hence, it is very important for both sides to address these misconceptions, and as rightly New Delhi has taken the initiative, and you can say PM's visit to Russia 4 times to ensure that India is doing the balancing act. India's silence on the Russia-Ukraine war and India's absent from voting in US Security Council is looking to what? Balance the relation with Russia. Similarly, Vladimir Putin has also tried to address India's concerns or sensitivities, where he has issued a statement saying Russia won't export to China or Pakistan any kind of technologies that will harm India's interest. Hence, you can say both countries should be mature enough that in the changing geopolitical realities, divergence are bound to happen between two good friends, but they have to be managed. As S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, writes in his book, The India Way, that time has come for India to currently to manage China, engage America, reassure Russia, cultivate Europe, and bring Japan into play. Something like that you can write. So in these kind of questions, it does not depend how many scholars you have or how many viewpoints you are writing. More you have to address the key words in the question. If you are able to understand the key words in the question, break down the question, then your answer writing will be much simpler, much easier. So questions can be asked anyway. These are the things you are going to work with. These are the contexts you are going to write. So you have to understand the question, structure your answer systematically, address the key parts in the question. What is the misconception? What are the facts? And also you have to explain that however even misconceptions can be root cause of breakdown of relations. Hence these misconceptions should be managed. So any doubt in this part? Now let us similarly take one more important country is India and US. India-US bilateral relations. So let us look at some questions which have come on India and US, and let us see how we can answer these questions. Okay, let us take a question here. Discuss, I was asked in I think 2015, discuss the significance, of Indo-US strategic partnership, partnership and its implication for India's security, and national defense. India's security and national defense. 20 marks. You have to write the answer. So IR questions are always easy to write, provided you know certain basic thing, as I told you, pre-prepared introductions, conclusions, and you are able to structure your answer. So if you look at the keywords here, the asked is that discuss the significance. Significance means importance of what? Indo-US strategic partnership. So what do you mean by strategic partnership? What is meant by strategic partnership for the online student? Because here understanding basic concepts is very important to write good answers. What do you mean by strategic partnership? It is basically a partnership with a country with having a common set of goals to be achieved. Strategic goals. So what do you mean by strategic goals? Common threat perception with it. So its implication, and they have told implication. So you can write both. There can be positive implications also, there can be also negative implications also on India's security and national defense. So how will you structure your answer? What will be your introduction? What will you write as your introduction? That's what was the statement? And America is father of democracy. Why you will write all that? That introduction does not suit to this question. Anybody else? What is the introduction? What will be an apt introduction to this question? So you can write PM Modi has said India and US relations, India-US relations have overcome the what is that, hesitations or something is in a India-US relationship has overcome historic hesitations, or there is some statement he made. Let me check. Historic hesitations. India and US relations have overcome the historic hesitations. And you can say it has been one of the most defining relationship in the 21st century. It will be one of the most defining relation in 21st century. Yeah. Then what will you write? And what is the other keyword you have to write? Hesitations of history. Correct. It is one of the most defining partnership of 21st century. Then what will you write? So in your answer, you have to write what has made the shift in the relationship to move on a strategic front. So you have rise of China and also the rise of non-state actors such as terror groups and you can say both countries want to protect the liberal world order has brought the both countries on a common path. So you can say the strategic partnership has manifested with respect to formation of Quad. Okay. So in what way it is significant? In what way this is significant? Because they are asking, discuss the significance of Indo-America strategic partnership. One, it will be significant with respect to both can work together commonly on protecting the UN Convention on the Loss of Seas. This will also ensure that Asia can remain multipolar. It will act as a deterrence with respect to what? Countries like China from their what? Their aggression within South China Sea. Fourth one, it is also significant in that regard, since you can say they can come together to tackle the problem of terrorism and also ensure stability in problematic regions such as Afghanistan, where America's hard power can complement India's soft power. So here you can write about what is the strategic significance of it. And then what is the implication for India's security? So one, you can say it can boost India's technological capacity or thing. For example, you can say, write about Lemova. So this will enable India to access naval ports controlled by America, which will help India's humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. Second one, you have agreements such as COMCASA and BECA will improve or sharpen India's intelligence, which will be very crucial for tackling threats from non-state actors such as terror groups. Third one, they have also given India a major defense partner status, which is usually only given to non-NATO allies. So India is only the third non-NATO ally to receive it. This can ease India's exports, defense exports from US to India, and this will boost India's what? Defense preparedness, especially for balancing the growing what you can say, the keyword with China, what do you call that? The growing asymmetry with China. And you can also say this signing of ISET recently will enable to bring certain advanced technologies in India. For example, GE has agreed to manufacture engines in India, and both can work together in what? High-end technologies or emerging and sensitive technologies. So these will all boost what? India's security to ability to tackle both traditional as well as non-traditional security threats. And it will also boost India's national defense, because India faces the risk of what? A two-front war. And these kind of technologies are also very important to tackle the Pakistan's export of what? The proxy war. And it also enables India to stand up to China along its border incursions, where China is using salami slicing strategies. So bilateral military exercise will act as a deterrence to China's aggressive. However, some would also argue that what? India's growing closeness to US can lead to a possible emergence of Russia, Pakistan and China's collaboration, which might be a greater threat to India along the border. And since India has joined Quad, you can say this has made China more aggressive along the Indian border, and you can say the modus vivendi has broken down. And thirdly, though DTTI agreement was signed, but very little technological transfer happened on the ground. And some are skeptical about America's transfer of sensitive technologies to India. And you have people like C. Raja Mohan, and Harsh V. Pant have also said that India should also invest on what? Atmanirbhar Bharat, or building self capabilities. Because India cannot always depend on US for its national security or defense, because end of the day America, or what do you say, as Palmer and Perkins say, there are no permanent friends and there are no permanent enemies, there are permanent interests. So you can say the future of Indo-America relationship will depend upon to what extent the Americans can accommodate India's national interest in their larger geopolitical strategy. This you can use as a conclusion to your answer. So again, point here, it's not important which scholar you are quoting, etc. It's more important the analysis what you bring on your paper. Yeah, you can say Shivani has also made a good point. Since the American hegemony is also declining, the American capability is also declining. So that also raise doubts to what extent that America will, be a reliable strategic partner when it comes to facing the Chinese challenge. So again, point here, it's only analysis what is required. It's not facts so much, or it is not who is saying what. So many people are bothered more about who is saying what. See, if you are able to remember one article somebody has analyzed, yeah, you can use their name there, or you can use PM Modi's views in that regard, or S. Jaishankar's views in that regard. More important should be given to keywords what you use in your answer. More important to give it with what frameworks you are analyzing in that regard, like strategic divergence, strategic convergence. Same point. So that's what I told here, don't start your answer with India and America being largest democracy. Question is more about strategic convergence, defense ties. So they're asking two parts of the question. What is the significance of this strategic convergence? You have to tell significance to the world, significance to Asia, significance to the liberal world order. So again, so here you can bring many points, but it's more important how do you divide your answer and how do you structure your answer. That is more important. That's why I told keywords are always important in the questions. If you are able to identify the keywords correctly, then your answer will come out very well. So the keywords was what? Significance of what? Indo-US strategic partnership. It is not India-US democratic partnership or cultural engagement. It is strategic partnership. And they are telling what is the implication. So you have to look at implication from both angles, positive implications and also what are the negative implications on what. They are asking about India's security. So basically India's major security threats are what? Terror groups, the China issue, the Pakistan factor in that regard, the instability in Afghanistan. Then you can say what is India's national defense? Okay, our defense capabilities, it will be boosted or what? So, if you are able to synchronize and address these parts, your answer. So that's what many people think in IR. They think IR is that you have to read a lot of current affairs. It's not reading about current affairs. It's only getting that analytical mindset and how you can develop that analytical mindset when you read articles or these ORF certain documents which are there. Means Hindu or Indian Express we have read regularly. There is no need of any special document. Here and there you can just add. I have shared one document also with India and US, but again it is unstructured, it is not structured, but you have to be able to know where to use what. Okay, questions can come different way. So let us think, there is asked one more question in 2015. Comment on India's growing, means we will not solve it, just look into it. Comment on India's growing relationship with US in background of constrained relation between India and China. So first of all you have to start your answer by saying that in 2005 we say is the beginning of the strategic partnership between India and US. Why? Because it marked what the rise of China became a common threat to both India and US. And then you can say that why the relationship is growing on behalf of China. So one part of the answer you can say how China has brought both countries together, defense, strategic partnership, South China Sea, okay, free and open Indo-Pacific, and how why America needs India and why India needs America. But at the same time you can say that there are differences also. Their idea of Indo-Pacific is different. America's Indo-Pacific from Bay of Bengal to American coast. For India it is from coast of Somalia. India does not view Quad as an Asian NATO. India views Quad is not mainly against China. And many times India wants to do multi-alignment. India does not want to be a camp follower of US. So for example, India's presence in SCO, BRICS in that regard. So you have to analyze the angle that how India is trying to balance its relation. So many times when you read the question, you need to understand the context of the question, then you have to be able to bring your points. So that's why I told, don't worry too much here about okay which scholar. Here and there you can use scholars, but bring more concepts, more analysis in your answer, that will be more beneficial. And that is one misconception among many students, is that what they think that current affairs is there so much. If you see, there is not so much of current affairs. Nobody is asking you specifically about ISET or DTTI. Maybe once in a while they'll ask that if you have no basic idea, you can write about it. Getting a point? So largely we can see US, Russia are important countries what they've asked. The other important country which has consistently featured in the recent year question paper is Israel. So again, if you look at India and Israel, what are the points that you can connect with India and Israel? What are the key points you can remember? Just whatever you can remember. One, you can say India's policy was largely driven by idealism. India's diplomatic what you can say boycott of Israel till 1992. Then you have to know P.V. Narasimha Rao. Then you will also have to know India's support to two-state solution. Then you can also say the Arab appeasement policy. Then you can also look at, means remember Nehru, Gandhi, the Muslim population in India, for an important vote bank, and that is why India's policy is largely driven by Muslim sensitivity also. Then you can say the relationship acquiring more maturity with respect to once they removed this diplomatic boycott, and Kargil war and Israel's help to India, which allowed to India to look at these aerial positions of Pakistan thing. Then you can also look at L.K. Advani, the first high-level visit from India to Israel when he was the deputy PM. And then you can say growing relations in the sectors such as defense, space, dryland, agriculture, water harvesting, tourism, intelligence sharing, Mossad, and raw keywords, whatever you can, Barak missiles, whatever you remember regarding. And then you can say with the rise of Prime Minister Modi. Okay, there are a lot of factors that has led to dehyphenation. One, the rise of BJP in India, and BJP's ideological roots go to the RSS, and RSS ideological roots is based on cultural nationalism, and this has natural coherence with the Zionist nationalism. Like parties in Israel have been always right wing, Likud, the current party which is there, and Prime Minister Modi's personal good relations with Israel even when he was the CM of Gujarat. And then you can say the changing situation in West Asia. So no longer you can say there is growing sense of decline of the religious angle and growing sense of Arab countries to what? More economics being the foundations of relations, enabled India to balance the relations. And you can say Prime Minister Modi's visit to Israel basically was a declaration of dehyphenation of Israel-Palestinian relations. And you can say then the Israeli Prime Minister making a statement that India-Israel relation is a marriage made in heaven. Or you can say Israeli think tank which said all these years India treated Israel as a mistress, but now has openly acknowledged her as the wife. Then you can also look at the angle that today relationship is also entered, minilaterals. So formation of I2, U2. But however, you can say some constraints continue in the relationship. For example, India continues to support the two-state solution. India criticized the Hamas action recently, but has not declared Hamas as a terror group. India has been critical of Israel's Rafah border. India also did not accept the Americans or Trump's declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So India has also continued to give aid to Palestine. So you can say 5 million or 5 billion aid has been given. The Prime Minister's visit to Palestine in 2017 and President and Vice President visit to Palestine. So India has continued to do a balancing act. So these are the content that you can have. So based on this content, you have to be able to See, it's not that for every single question you need to remember a scholar. Okay, Shivani has a doubt saying that what I don't remember scholar, it's fine. These are all not theories, na? These are just opinions of somebody. If you don't remember, just write what is the analysis. So usually in Israel relationship, you have Nicholas Barrel, who is one of the commentator. Just have one or two, it's not always it is required. If you are able to recall, right. So now if you look at the questions in this regard, direct, easy questions to answer. Identify the key sectors of cooperation between India and Israel, since 2014. Examine the significance of strengthening of bilateral ties between two countries. So how will you answer this question? This was asked for 15 marks. Identify, so there are two parts to the question. So first part of the question, you have to identify the key sectors of cooperation with India and Israel since 2014. Then you also have to tell what is the importance, the significance, okay, strategic significance, political significance, economic significance, technological significance of the strengthening of bilateral relations between these two countries. So obviously, what will be your approach of writing the answer? So here you can see for every IR question, especially 20 marker 50, don't immediately jump into question, give a background. Okay. So you can say, for a long time, India's relationship with Israel was mainly seen through the lens of Arab appeasement policy. But over the years, India's relation with Israel has moved towards pragmatism, and you can say that since 2014, it has entered a new era of de-hyphenation. So, no two countries' relationship has blossomed as quickly as India and Israel since the last decade. That can be your introduction. So, give a background that how was the relation and how it has changed. Now, then you have to come into saying that what are the key sectors of cooperation since 2014? So, if you had seen when Prime Minister Modi visited Israel, there in that statement only a lot of sectors were given. So, one you can say, of course, it has been always defense is one important sector. Second one, agriculture has been the important sector. Dairy farming is one more important sector. Tourism has been the other important sector. Intelligence sharing, the growing monotony between Mossad, RAW, you can say the Sardar Vallabhbhai Police Academy has tied up an MOU with Israel. Then, what is the other important sector? Space is another important sector where India has launched satellites for Israel in that regard. Then, water management, Make in India, where Israel has made investment, innovation, etc., HR, human resource development. These are the sectors. Then you need to write what is the significance. So try to write the significance in that India's closer relations with Israel today as what it is significant, because Israel being one of the important pole within the region, it will help India to balance its interest in West Asia. Second one, it will help India to, what I can say, improve its defense capabilities, especially to face the challenge from Pakistan or the cross border thing Pakistan. So you can say India has also done Israeli type of surgical strikes in that regard. Third one, you can say both countries can operate on anti-terror groups which are operating in West Asia, which is a common threat to both India and Israel. Fourth significance is that it also helps Israel to break their isolation in the world, because India's influence can help Israel to come out of isolation. Fourth, it is also significant because they can take the relationship to next level with formation of I2U2, a new security architecture. And fifth significance is what? Of India and Israel coming together. So India can also use its now influence on Israel with respect to playing this role of what? Arbitrator in the Israel and Palestinian dispute. So in a way, this relationship has become significant. However, there are minor challenges in the relationship. You can say India has continued. So then you can conclude your answer saying that today we can say India and Israel relationship has truly matured into a multi-sectoral relationship. It cannot be only seen through the lens of defense. So that is what you can write in your answer. So here it is more about understanding the exact demand of the question and breaking down the question into parts and trying to approach it. Say any question you take again on India and Israel, any other question there was same, it will be almost of the same, what you can say, areas. One more question they've asked is that has the recent Indo-Israeli relationship given new dynamics to India's stand on Palestinian statehood? So obviously some changes have happened. For example, India didn't vote in UN against the human rights thing, they abstained. So second one, India is supporting still two-state solution, but however they are not specifying that East Jerusalem as the capital of thing. But however, India has continued to say that what we believe in a two-state solution, a separate state of Palestine is given, and you have to write what they're also doing to balance Palestine, like 5 billion aid, visits, etc. Same to same. And India also did not accept Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And if you look at what else question they have asked. In history of foreign policy, seldom have relation between any two nations blossomed as fast as in the case of India and Israel discuss. So obviously first you have to tell why it had not blossomed. What was the main problem? The ideological hindrance, India's focus on idealism or Arab appeasement policy. Then you can say how slowly domestic conditions change in India and India's strategic needs, domestic needs, disintegration of Soviet Union, India's need to diversify. And then you can say the rise of BJP in India, and you can also say that now the Israelis' help in Kargil war has now led to complete diversification and connect dehyphenation and new sectors. So here don't too much worry about scholars in your mind. That is one misconception. One or two if you are able to remember, right. But more try to address the demand of the question, break down the question, structure into parts. So always give a brief historical background, especially in 50 and 20 marker question. Don't jump into the question there itself. For here, 10 marker question you can do it. For like if they are telling no, seldom in history there is no two countries which relation have blossomed. So first you have to tell why the relationship had not blossomed till 1990s. One short paragraph. Then you come into why relationship blossomed post 1990s or post 2000s. Reasons, strategic reasons, political reasons, economic reasons. And then you also have to write about some problems which continue to stay in the relationship, but then conclude on a positive note. So today there is no denying fact that India and Israel relationship have emerged to a level of natural allies, or something like that you can write. So any doubt in this part regarding India and Israel? So we'll end today's class here. Tomorrow will be the final class. So we'll cover the remaining Afghanistan issue which is there, and some minor Japan, these countries are there. And then we'll look into the comparative politics, that is political sociology, traditional approach, comparative approach, role of political parties, role of pressure groups. So tomorrow will be the final class of the crash course. So tomorrow's class will be again same 5:30 to 8, the same venue and the same timings. So some notes I'll upload on the group regarding the update, but it will take 3 or 4 days time. And for comparative politics I've already uploaded. So tomorrow we'll be discussing the large final few questions. So that's why I told, don't worry too much about this scholar thing. Bring concepts, yeah, where relevant you try to link them, but more try to address the demand of the question. So there should be a structured flow of thought in your answer. So try to do brainstorming of the question, you will get multiple dimensions. Okay, so tomorrow we'll cover SCO, BRICS, NATO, these kind of areas which are there, along with Afghanistan, Japan, because the other 2 countries which are they've asked in the exam. And then we'll go into the last part, comparative politics. It's very simple. The notes is systematic, and I'll also take up 2 or 3 questions to solve. So the main idea of the crash course was to enable to students to get an idea what should be their approach of writing. But knowing the approach is different, writing it is different. So that you will have to practice. Okay. So we'll end it today. Tomorrow will be the final class.